Hello, friends. Hello, my vital tribe. It's Angela. Hey, I have some questions for you. So tell me, how have the events of the last week affected you? Has your anxiety or vigilance increased? Do you feel like your fight, flight, freeze response is like activated? Are you wanting to like curl up in a ball and eat all the ice cream? Or are you wanting to just lash out at anybody you think's a jerk out there in the world? Or are you wanting to just numb out, binge on, I don't know, some kind of great Netflix show or something like that? So, what if I told you there was a better way, a more evolved way to deal with stress? Would you like that? Because if you would, I'd like to hear from you. So, just to introduce myself, I am Angela Ward. I am a registered nurse, transformational coach, and CEO of Guardian at the Gateway, where we help people who are struggling with that feeling of divine discontent to really reclaim their passion and purpose in their lives, their work, and their relationships, all that good stuff. So before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. If this is your first time here, I'll sit on my hands because obviously I'm trying to talk to you with my hands, and that's not helpful. If you're watching this live, please post a comment for me. I can see them if you give StreamYard permission. If you're watching on Facebook, I can see who's posting. Uh, it's really great to have some hearts, emojis, some likes, and comments. Please ask your questions if you're watching live so I can answer those for you. And if you're watching the replay, put hashtag replay in the comments. Yeah, so are you ready to get going? Let's take some notes if you need them. I just want to tell you that before I started this particular conversation today, I was working, you know, I don't just pull this stuff out of my butt for you guys. I like try to gather good information and resources. So I was going down the rabbit hole. Such a good place to go. Um, So we're just going to just talk a little bit today, and there'll be so much more we can say. But the topic of today's conversation is tend and befriend. Have you ever heard of that statement before? Some of you may have. It's an alternative approach to the fight, flight, freeze response to stress. So, first of all, what's wrong with the fight, flight, freeze response to stress? First of all, I just want to offer gratitude that our nervous systems have the capacity to deal with stress. That's wonderful that we have a built in system that knows how to respond and challenge when things are challenging, can kind of find our way through. However, we do know that chronic ongoing stress is linked to poor health outcomes, especially over time, including increased cortisol levels, which can lead to poor sleep, higher blood glucose, insulin intolerance, weight gain or loss, like pain or tolerance to pain. There's so many studies and so much information out there about it. But the important part to understand, which I'm sure you already know, is that chronic stress and having an activated nervous system that maybe makes you feel really vigilant or on alert or shut down. I mean, it sucks. Is anyone in agreement with me? Like, it sucks to be stressed out all the time. So let's dive in a little bit to that paradigm. The old paradigm of stress response is related to something called the autonomic nervous system. It's part of how our nervous system works. The old paradigm really speaks to the sympathetic nervous system versus, in this teeter totter way, the parasympathetic nervous system. So, what we understand about these nervous systems is the parasympathetic nervous system is the older one. We have a longer lineage of evolved creatures carry the parasympathetic nervous system response. And it's the one that's responsible for that rest and digest. It's how most people understand it. The sympathetic nervous system is a newer system that's more evolved, and it's most of us understand it as the fight or flight response. Although freeze has been added in there, and I feel like there's one other one, but we'll work with those. Hi, Kathleen. Yes, stress sucks. I 100% agree with you. In fact, I'm going to just show that right. Who agrees? Yes, I think most of us would agree to that. So there is a newer emerging paradigm around stress and the autonomic nervous system, and this is certainly not new to me. I mean, this is not my area of expertise. Um, this is sourced from Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory and Rudolf Stone's polarity theory. I accessed this work initially through John Chitty, who and working with newborns. Um, he wrote two really great books that I love. I first heard about it in this one, Dancing with Yin Yang. Actually, I heard it first in this one, Working with Babies, which is fantastic and really interesting about working with newborn nervous systems when babies first come earthside. But dancing yin yang is a little more of a broader spectrum piece of work, and I highly recommend it. So that's my how I got into this piece. Um, the part that they introduce, and I think this really comes from Stephen Porges, is the idea that there are three components to our autonomic nervous system. There is the parasympathetic, the older one, the sympathetic, and then a newer, even one that is called the social nervous system, which is really based in oxytocin relationships. The thing that I think is so interesting about this newer approach is rather than having sympathetic and parasympathetic in this weird teeter totter place, it identifies that there are kind of a hierarchy of these nervous system responses and that they have a normal function and they're supposed to work together to achieve a harmonious balance. But they have this normal function and then they also have a stress response. And I think that most of us that have worked with babies, newborns particularly, and probably very young children, can witness this nervous system response in real time. So normally, what you might see, especially with a baby that's getting to the place where they can make eye contact, is when they experience stress, they oftentimes will try to connect with their care provider first, which is the social response. uh, if the stress continues, a lot of babies will then turn to this crying, inconsolable, upset, kicking place. And then when that kind of breaks down, is usually when babies will move into that essentially freeze state. I'll see if I can find a video to post in the Unveiled Vitality group to identify this, but I think many of us can see this maybe when we relate to others, how at first, if there's a little stress in interpersonal relationships, usually we try to connect first, but then maybe it triggers a bit of a fight energy, and then it turns into that maybe stonewalling. I think this is a really interesting paradigm to consider. I know I just said a whole bunch of stuff. Let me see if there's anything else I want to add based on this lovely book. So the old view of the sympathetic nervous or the excuse me, autonomic nervous system is that it has those two pieces and it's reciprocal as a teeter-totter and on and off. Uh, the new view is that there's those three pieces, the social, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and that they're sequential based on phylogeny, which means they're evolutionary uh, layer. So they'll de-evolve as you move through stress. Um, it's really important to differentiate the normal functions of these systems versus the stress response, which I just mentioned. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of information here that we can dive into. Maybe if this is interesting to you, I can do some more talks on it in the future. It's certainly fascinating to me. But why am I bringing this up right now? If there's any guesses, you are welcome to throw it in the chat. But I want to acknowledge that many of us have been living under a high level of stress for a period of time now. And then there's these peaks of additional stress, acute stress on top of a bit of the chronic stress. And I don't know if anyone's had that experience of their nerves feeling fried, but I think that can really happen as the especially when cortisol is just like flooding your system all the time. It really can burn you out. Cortisol is an important part of our daily function, but when it's like excreted constantly, it's not healthy for us. So, as we've experienced this last week, watching the attempted coup or whatever we want to call it of our country and the violence and the death, I think that it caused another layer of stress. And for some people, you may want to start hunkering down, but I would like to invite you to understand that finding ways to connect is actually a healthier, more higher evolved social response to this to stress. I know connecting together in real life is challenging with COVID, but we can still find ways to activate that oxytocin juiciness. I'll offer some more tips on that during the week. But there's a couple other ways we can approach how to activate this social nervous system. There was a really lovely study that came out recently, and I'll share the link with you guys, that showed how kindness can decrease cortisol levels. And I know that sounds perhaps a little trite or simplistic, but this interview I heard with the researcher, they were testing her blood cortisol levels, and she had particular days that she worked in conjunction with random acts of kindness and gratitude. And the days that she practiced random acts of kindness and gratitude, her blood levels of cortisol were much lower. So, what I'm telling you, and the importance of this little piece, is that the action right now of kindness and gratitude has an immediate effect on your nervous system. Immediate. It's not a question of building it over time that you have a gratitude practice and generally you'll feel better later. Like, no, really, it's affecting your hormonal response in your body. So, I just want to encourage that little piece. I'll share the link and let you guys take a dive into that a little bit more. Um, so, kindness and gratitude, that's one way we can work with this. Another piece is there are actual activities that can help us activate our oxytocin levels. So, we can do a whole day on conversation on oxytocin if you would like. You just let me know in the comments. But some simple things that can help increase your oxytocin levels are if you are a pet owner, there's evidence that gazing into your beloved pet's eyes will help increase not only your blood level of oxytocin, but also your pet's level of oxytocin. Um, Even watching an emotional movie where you can have some compassion, doesn't have to be porn, sexy. I don't mean that. I mean something that invites that empathy and compassion can actually activate this uh, oxytocin levels. And actually, now that you're watching Kathleen, I know that Kathleen's a movie buff, and that makes a lot of sense why films are your thing, girl. You're releasing some oxytocin. That's absolutely fantastic. Another great way to start releasing some oxytocin is dancing, moving your body, getting out of your head, or listening to music. I personally like to obviously merge those two together. And touch with yourself or with someone who you love. It doesn't have to be a sexual partner, it can be someone, uh, any kind of connective, warm touch. So we are not in a position to really like front hug people unless they're in our COVID circle, right? But one thing that I've enjoyed doing with other people is the backside wiggle. So if you can get your spine up against somebody else and get your booty on your friend and just kind of lean into each other and move, that is touch. There's also the technique of havening, which I've spoken about in other Mondays with Meaning, where there's self-soothing touch that can be super relaxing. Um, so Google havening, but it's rather simple. It's just stroking your own skin. And one thing that I find helpful, I actually learned this from my husband, was he's a massage therapist. And he one time had this insight that his hands were so healing for other people. I hope I'm not speaking about this correctly, but my incorrectly, but my impression was that he had this insight that if his hands were healing, they could be healing to himself as well, which I think is amazing, right? So we can also use that loving presence of touch on ourselves to help stimulate that oxytocin. So that's another lovely technique to try to get this tend and befriend energy to come up. So, yeah, that's kind of the basics I wanted to start with this week. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat or insights you've had about what you're thinking. Let me see if there's any other pieces I wanted to share with you. Like I said, I could definitely go on and on about this, and we can talk more about polyvagal theory and talk more about oxytocin if that's helpful. But I love it. Um, yeah, I think that's a good place to end for today as far as the topic of tending and befriending. So I'm going to do two more things. I think I'd like to draw a little card for the week to see if that might give us a little oxytocin inspiration. So, which card does it want to be today? This is the problem with having so many fun cards lying around. We're going to do Rumi. We're going to do a Rumi card because I love Rumi, one of the most beautiful poets. Rumi and Hafiz are my favorites. Okay, my favorite Persian poets, I guess. There's many lovely poets. So I'm shuffling, and if anybody wants to tell me what to do next, just pop on in the chat and say stop or take that card on the top or the bottom or cut the deck or whatever. There's a little bit of a delay, so I'm going to keep just doing this till I hear something. Kathleen, I think it's going to have to be you that calls it. Okay, I'm going to pick this one right here on the very top. Ooh. Ha ha ha. Okay, can you see it? It's called The Impossible Made Possible. Wow, that looks like an amazing universe. The earth and this universal space. Okay, and it's number 9. I don't know if that matters to anybody in particular. But let's see what Rumi has to say about the impossible made possible. Love brings the sea into boiling and turns the mountains into a pebble. Love creates infinite openings in the dark sky and shudders the earth with its magnitude. She spins, this great earth goddess, upon invisible strings amongst a wildly pulsating ballet of life. Stars are born, live, and die all around her. Life moves in constant flux, and still she spins in her great, loving, constant pirouette. How can this be? All of creation is born from nothing. Out of endless silence and darkness, light emerges. What strange magic is this? The sun heats the solar system and burns with the power to destroy life, and yet it is a force by which life is sustained. Surely this makes no sense and cannot be. We dance in the realm of the impossible made possible constantly, you and I. We are engrossed in it, so familiar with it and yet blind to it, that these constant impossibilities happening in every moment fail to inspire us. Yet, what are your biggest, boldest, most extraordinarily impossible dreams compared to this great impossibility of life itself? Ah, they are but tiny seeds in the Creator's masterful hand, being now placed in the heavenly garden. Yes, they are being planted right now, for the moon tells us the time is right. Most tenderly shall they be watched over, nurtured into fullness according to the season. Yes, that growth is assured. The impossible is now made possible. I'll read on just a tiny bit more. This is like pages of stuff, but it says next, we only limit what we believe to be possible by our lack of imagination. Mm. The divine has recourse to all that is and all that is yet to be. Is there any limit to the resources of the heavens? No. So then, why has not every impossible dream now been rendered possible, indeed manifest in the shining glory upon the earth? The human heart knows everything envisioned can manifest according to divine timing and grace. And yet the mind does quake with fear, so much so that it will not listen to the heart at times. That fear is a childlike nightmare, that you should offer yourself up to the sacred loving power of the great Creator, you might be found lacking. The mind holds itself captive with dark fantasies of profound rejection and then avoids confronting it directly at all costs. What it creates barriers instead, truly nothing more than lines in the sand and yet believed to be forts. Hmm. There's more, and I will try and scan that and get that in the group so you guys can read it. I hope that that has a little bit of insight for you. I guess what that might mean for me is, despite the challenges, I believe that by managing my own mind and my own nervous system, that I can help others manage theirs. And from a place of grounded, balanced safety, we can make better choices. When our brain isn't flooded with cortisol, cortisol makes it hard to think clearly. Let's find ways to quiet that so we can become wise in how we care for one another, how we relate to one another, how we love one another, how we can show kindness to one another. It's a lot. Well, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. And last little piece before we go. So announcements. Of course, the Mighty Network, our group on Mighty Networks is open. Please come over if you'd like. I'll put the link in. Um, and also next week, starting Monday, we will be having the week-long Disrupt the Disruptor intensive. So this is going to be daily, about 30-minute teaching with some action on the topic that I'm going to ask you to kind of dive into each day. It's not going to be like so intense that you can't live your life too, but we're going to bring some awareness into how your talk disrupts your ability to function, and we can quiet that disrupting saboteur in your mind. And I'm really looking forward to it. We did that little webinar a couple weeks back, I think just before Christmas, and it was helpful. So I think being able to spread it out over a couple days and dive into it a little bit more will be more impactful. So if you're interested in joining, make sure that you register. If you'd like to bring people along, there is going to be a special offering for the people that you bring. You will be given a ticket into a little hat where I'm going to pick the winner of a prize. And I usually give out pretty cool prizes. So I'd love to have you bring people along. All right, my friends, much love to you today. See what you can do to bring some kindness and gratitude in. You know, do your best and let me know if I can support you in any way. All right. Love you all. Bye.